So we're going to have a conversation around just what's going on in our culture, right? And these shifts that have been happening. I think you all know we're in a post-Christian culture. You know, if that is news to you, we're going to take a look at some data that's there, and you all have plenty of data that you're going to be working with, certainly. So part of the role that I have is I get the chance to travel around to different congregations, and probably 4 years ago, I just noticed through the insight data particular trends, and I could be in Texas, and the trends that you would see in the Mission Insight data is just simply, I call it 3 to 5% less Jesus. Just the simplest way that I put it, but in the packets and the information that you have from the year 2012 to 2017, we can just look at some of the different examples that would happen. I'm like, well, you know, at one point I was up in the Northeast, and I'm like, well, maybe it's just a Northeast thing. You know, and then it's like, certainly you go to the Portland, Oregons, and you would expect that, you know, on the coast, you know, that there's some of that's certainly happening. I would go to church in Missouri. Same thing, it's like this 3 to 5%, just less Jesus that's happening just from the years 2012 to 2017. That's a staggering move. When you think about 3% or 5% of a population that are making some shifts in that, and we're going to look at some of the specifics around that. The data that we're going to be taking a look at, it comes from Pew Research. Is one of the sources that I look at. The Barna Research Group is another one that we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to look at the Mission Insight reports, which how many of you feel maybe a little bit overwhelmed or with some of the data and the information that's there? Yeah, you're not alone. I get overwhelmed sometimes when you look at the 14 pages of this or 12 pages of this, but we're going to be citing some of the different places there, and there's also an individual that our team had a chance to go visit by the name of Carrie Nieuwhof. Maybe some of you have listened. Carrie Nieuwhof has a great podcast, just a great leader of church thought in Canada. And so we had a chance to spend the day with Carrie Nieuwhof. This is probably 3 years ago. Carrie is a couple hours north of Toronto, there in Canada. And just to hear his perspective, probably 20 years ago, in his community is probably about 35,000 people. He would say, you know, there's probably about 20 healthy-ish churches in our community at that time. Today, there's 2. Many of those churches have become bed and breakfasts, restaurants, pubs, and Canada is on, we can learn from that, of what has been happening in that community. Left completely unchecked in this track that we're on, we're seeing those similar signs that are happening in our culture, in our society. So we looked at the data in Lab 1. You just looked at the decline of what we see for mainline churches, ASA numbers, seeing 20% plus decline over a 10-year period, a couple percentage points a year. We know those trends to be true. I love this question. I think our culture is just, in some respects, just saying, why would I go to church? If we just simplify it down, why would I go? I don't have the tradition, the history that you all have. I don't, maybe if I've never been part of a faith community, maybe if I didn't grow up in the church, but why would I actually go to church? And I think this is a question that we need to come back to, and if we in this room can't articulate a simple answer to this question, we're going to have a really hard time connecting with our culture. And it seems like a simple question, but we have a hard time articulating, I think, the answer to that question. Here are some other trends that are happening. I don't know how well you can see this, so I'm just going to call out a few things. This is kind of in the COVID season with where we're at. 41%, this is church preference of how do we experience church. And again, this is fairly new information that's coming out. Gen Z and Millennials, only 41 and 42% of them say that an in-person worship is their preferred style of worship. So nearly 60% of Gen Z and Millennials would say that they would prefer actually some different styles or some different options of how we do worship. Boomers, if you could see this here, is 71%. Does that surprise anyone? All right. So as we look at the trend and what's going on during the COVID season, the importance of exploring hybrid worship opportunities, and we can look at this data, and sometimes I just want to be able to just stick my head in the ground. It's like, that didn't make sense, right? When we looked at the trends of what's going on in our culture, I get different responses from the different churches that I work with. Sometimes there's concern, urgency, we need to do something about this. How do we recalibrate, what is it that we need to do? But oddly enough, I think one of the more common responses that I get from churches is, wow, that's something. And then we're going to go back to our regularly scheduled program, right? It's like we just are going to go back to what we are comfortable with and what we do. And it says this as if all this data and this information is coming at us, but we really don't we just kind of ignore it, right? And I think we have opportunities to do so much more than that. I'm just catching up my Chromebook here. All right, anybody recognize that place? Very good. We're not even on the map, I heard that. All right. So let's talk a little bit specifically about this area. So we could talk globally, and like Mark, that's nice that 3 to 5%, there's less Jesus, that's happened in different areas. But let's talk about this backyard right with where we're at. So Washington, D.C., and these areas, I took a look in where you all rank in the post-Christian rankings. This is a great place to show up in the top 50 list, right? And from a Barna perspective, Washington, D.C. was listed, in this region, was listed as 29th in the U.S. for being the most post-Christian. The top 8, by the way, were all churches in the Northeast. So close to your backyard, right? You're ahead of, if you look at it in those terms, I don't know that you would want to be ahead of, both Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Which that surprised me a little bit as well. So what are the reasons that these trends are starting to happen? This is right here, and we took the data straight from Mission Insight, and here's 6 of the top reasons for those that were outside of a religious group, or they don't affiliate themselves with any particular church, parish. What were their reasons? Religious people are too judgmental. You ever hear that? Religion is too focused on money. They don't trust organized religion. There's just a disillusionment with religion. Maybe they were part of something before, they grew up in some tradition, and they said, whoa, it's just not connecting with my life. It's just, there's some disconnect, something doesn't add up there. They don't trust religious leaders. Again, this is right here in your backyard. And it wasn't relevant to my life. So I think those probably, I'm guessing, aren't new to many of you. By the way, this is an interesting stat that I think you'll probably find in some of your packets as well that I thought was fascinating. 15.7% in your backyard simply said, I've never been invited. So Jennifer, what's the number of, from the total data pool that might be in that Mission Insight report for this entire region? Population? Just for the entire region, BC, or maybe somebody knows that. What's the population? Someone's Googling it real quick right now. 5.3 million people. And you take up 35,000 share of those 5.3 million. So think about that 15.7% number of 5.3 million. That means that there's over 750,000 people that would respond and simply say, I just wasn't invited. Isn't that a staggering number when you think about that? When you get squeamish about the word evangelism, there's 750,000 people that might just simply say, just invite me to go. Isn't that amazing? So when we facilitate these exercises, which we're going to look at a bit this afternoon, I stop and I pause with the different teams and I'm like, what's this 3 to 5% less Jesus? And what I mean by that, there's different statements that are made, and you've probably read those in your Mission Insight reports, but 3 to 5% more people over that 5-year period of time would say that Jesus was just a good teacher. No more. Right? And in a 5-year period, 3 to 5% more people, 5.3 million people, 150,000 to 250,000 more people in your backyard might agree with that statement. This is this wave and this shift of what's happening. Hypocrisy, we already talked about. So when I facilitate this exercise, I'll just ask them, what do you think is going on in our culture? And I'm going to ask you in a second, too, right? Hypocrisy does come up. We are attached to the bumper of all the scandals, sadly, that have happened in the Big C church, and I think that that's had a huge impact, whether it's the abuse throughout the Catholic Church, whether it's the mega church narcissist from the evangelical church. We are all attached to that bumper of the cynicism and just like, really? You all say this, but this is what's hitting the headlines. How about no? How about we just opt out, right? In our breakout session, was it Alicia, maybe, that you talked about a busy culture? So you got a great football team that's in the area. You know, those great football teams could just ruin everything for, for church sometimes, But this comes up over and over and over again. It's just this busy culture, this hyper focus with sports and activities and running around like a taxi service for their kids, right? Just all over the place. Sunday morning's no longer sacred. It's just, I could not go to a baseball game if it occurred before 1 o'clock on a Sunday. That was just the way it was back in the day, right? Man, that is so far gone now. But we have a busy culture. We have so many things coming at us at quite a pace, and this is something that comes up. There's lots of alternatives to community. You can find community in a lot of places. I think back in the when I think about the church and how the church was placed in the center of communities, it was the place that we went, and is where our friendships were, and where we did life, and we worked together. We went to church together, and it's the center of the community, and that it really exemplified community in a way that just didn't really exist. Now you can find community anywhere. You can be part of a Soul Cycle group. You can be part of these traveling sports teams. We have good friends that they would say that they found community in just the other parents that were part of the kids in their sports program, and they defended it. Community is no longer something that only the church can call an attribute if it is an attribute. We'll come back to that as well. Another thing that churches will respond to when I ask that question, when we're facilitating through that, is there's just this self-focused mindset. Hey, you do you. Whatever feels good to you, you just do that. You know, that term, you do you, there's just this hyper focus on self. And if I don't feel like doing something, I don't need to do it. I got lots of options. And there's just a hyper focus on individualism these days. That comes up. I got one more that I would add, but I would be curious of what do you all think are some of the truths about our culture today, and what are some of the challenges when you think about this mission we're on together? Yeah.
I think that one of the things that is unfortunate, I was reading an article in the Atlantic yesterday about political identity in churches, and someone in a church said, I've had lots and lots of people leave my church because our church didn't match their politics. I've never had anyone fit their politics to match what we're saying from the pulpit. And I think that we live in a time where, and there's been a lot of research on this, people's political preferences are first and foremost for whatever reason. That's just the way it is today. And so a lot of baggage gets associated with that in the church.
Yeah, I love that. That comes up, being too political. And I don't know, Washington, D.C., maybe is there a little bit of politics that's going on here? You all are intense. Let me just say, before I ever engaged with the diocese, I had the pleasure of now Bishop Paula Clark. I asked the question, who's someone I can talk to that can just give it to me straight, right? You know, just like, well, tell me, what am I walking into? What's going on? And one of the things that she told me is like, Mark, it's Washington, D.C. It's all political. Everything's political, and that's just not how we roll in Indiana, you know? So that was important for me. I was like, what? There's something going on, you know, in the news? But you all are, you're amped up, but I can see how that can certainly be part of it here, yeah, absolutely.
There's a lack of spiritual conditioning. I mean, some people, there's no reason they would ever come to church because they have no familiarity, background with that. And we're speaking a language that we've been speaking for centuries and not speaking to people that don't already have a little bit of that language. There's people who have none of that language.
Oh, I love that. There's just a disconnect in the language, and they don't get it. What are we even talking about? Great. Yeah.
Just a question. If the topic or the statistics were about post-religion versus post-Christian, would you find the same thing in Jewish groups or other religions?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the other data points that we'll look at here, I'll throw another slide up, but if you read the characteristics of what they're talking about as far as shifts in views, I don't think, it depends on your theology, sort of how important those things are. And so you'll notice some of the things that they've pulled in Mission Insight tend to lean a little bit more outside of what an Episcopalian would believe. And some would lend outside of what an evangelical might believe. And so there's a diversity in just religious thought in that survey. In fact, I can pull that up here. So these are some of the questions. Everyone and everything is a God. And it's just asking, and you have this in your data, you know, do we all disagree, there's no opinion, or all agree, from 2012 to 2017. I'll read some of these others. God is a higher state of consciousness that people may achieve. You almost could put either a type of belief system or a denomination by some of these statements, right?
Mark, can you scoot up for a little bit? You're in front of the
Thanks for that. I'm about to lose my cord. That's good. You can't look at the screen. Why would you want to be able to do that? God is love and invites the world into a loving relationship. All right, that might be, a little bit more in line with us, right? God is the full realization of human potential. I believe God created the world but takes no further part in it. I believe in more than one God or many gods. I believe in nature and or spirits in nature. I don't believe a God exists. The material universe is all that there is. I have a personal relationship with the one living God who is Lord and Savior. So these are where you can see the trends from 2012 to 2017. One of these key, if we were to look at the God is love and invites the world into a loving relationship, 10.8% less people agree with that in your backyard over a 5-year period of time. So that's from 2012 to 2017. They're going to be coming out with their new data in 2022. Does anyone think that those trends are in a positive direction? I think we might be surprised, or it'll be really eye-opening when that new data comes out in 2022, but I appreciate that question. That's great. All right, so one other factor. This will be a little bit fun. So I got a question for you. How many times do you think we check our phone in a day? Come on, what do you think it is? Any guesses? 20, maybe? Somebody thinks it's more than that? All right, well, I'll give it to you. 58 times. Is that surprise anybody? We check our phones 58 times in a day, right? Some of you are like, I actually check it a lot more than that. It's like, I've checked it 17 times just since you've been talking, I know. So I say that, so our source is eMarketer and Rescue Time. We spend 3 hours and 43 minutes a day on a mobile device. And again, we check it 58 times a day. And I use this because culturally, as far as the influence that this has. So for those of you who are 40 and above, 45 and above, you might be able to appreciate this, but I did this math because that's what I love to do, is I just ask things like this. But if we're awake for 16 hours, think back when we had the rotary phones, right? Remember we had to pick up the handle, you got the cord that stretches all out, and you're dialing a phone. So imagine Anne-Marie has to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and start her day, right? At 7 o'clock, she's going to pick up the phone, this rotary phone, and hang out on that phone for 3.8 minutes. All right, so you're just going to talk to someone at 7 a.m.? Anne-Marie, you're doing great. You're starting your day off. 16 and a half, you're going to hang up after 3.8 minutes. And after 16 and a half minutes, it's time again, Anne-Marie. Got to pick up that rotary phone. If you want to check out the newspaper or do some other things, but we need you on that phone for 3.8 minutes at 7:16 and 30 seconds. All right, you can hang it up now after. You might be talking to someone. You might be talking to your bank to move some funds around. There could be a lot of different things that you're doing on this phone, Anne-Marie. So, it's 7:16 and 30 seconds, and now it's 7:33 in the morning. Anne-Marie, it's time again. Pick up that phone, and we need you back on there for another 3.8 minutes. 58 times. Can you imagine that back in the day of doing it? Does that sound like insanity? So there are great things about technology. Love the phone, obviously there's a lot of task bundling that we're doing with that. But the influence of technology, I think, has been tremendous in our culture and society. The access to information, everyone's an expert. I just got to Google something, right? I may have mentioned this in the last slide, but it's like, I got opinions about a lot of stuff, but many of those opinions are because I just saw this Facebook feed, and I read someone's post, and now I have a position on gun control. Because I've spent, 2.5 minutes studying the subject of gun control, and I have an opinion about it now because I saw this Facebook post that clearly is true. And I'm now an expert. The influence of technology, I think, is tremendous. So let's run through these. One of the other things that I would mention with technology is there was a YouTube video that someone was working to dismantle Christianity in about 8 minutes. It was one of the leading atheists that was speaking. And it's a YouTube video that you can access. And that video has been viewed over 2 million times the last time I checked. And you just think about the influence of what is available to us on our phones, and not that information isn't helpful to understand, but what does that do when people are thinking about church and culture and showing up? We're going to wrap up with some of these are going to be just summary things, but these are 5 things, and you got blanks. You got those blanks in your book, and you're like, I want to fill in these blanks, so I want to make sure that happens. Going back to Barna, there's 5 reasons why millennials have stopped attending your church. This first one sounds like a few in one, but the church is irrelevant, the leaders are hypocritical, and the leaders have experienced too much moral failure. So again, from Barna's perspective, irrelevant, hypocritical, too much moral failure. That's one, by the way, that's one of your blanks, even though you just filled out 3. We chatted about that a bit. The antidote to that, I think, is can we just be a community of integrity? It doesn't have to be us. This doesn't have to be our story. Our individual, not here, right? We can be a place of integrity. Number 2, God is missing in the church. People go to church looking for God, but are having a difficult time finding them. The question of, if I go here, will I actually experience God? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you all do. Again, I'm talking as maybe an outsider or someone that is connecting. Can I actually experience God, though? Will you help me do that? Millennials are having a hard time when they attend churches to actually have an experience with God. God is missing in the church. Number 3, legitimate doubt is prohibited. Legitimate doubt is prohibited. I grew up a little bit more in a conservative tradition, and what I got frustrated by when I hit 20-ish or somewhere there is that I felt like I had these trite answers fed to me, right? God is good all the time, God is good. My life is going through chaos right now. That's not working for me. I need a little bit more than that. What else you got, right? And there's just these cliche, trite answers that I felt like often that I had. So there's that end of the pendulum that we can swing to, is just to oversimplify, tie a bow on things, and just sweep it away. Don't worry about those life struggles you have. Don't ask those questions. The other extreme can be we make it so complex and so mysterious that I don't know what you're saying. Did you even answer the question? Right? We can swing way over here to the other extreme that it's just this big mystery. When there's questions that can be answered, we need to answer those. And there's a lot of questions that we can answer when we're talking about how do we just point people to this person in Jesus, right? There's just, you can explore and ask those questions. That's such a great thing. But sometimes we get so complex that we're out here that it's even more confusing. Number 4, they're not learning about God. Kate, I think you said it as far as speaking a different language. There have been messages, I get the chance to secret shop places all the time, right? There's been some messages that I've sat through and I'm like, I have no idea what was just said. I don't know what to take away from that. I'm not sure where that was going. I don't know what was going. I felt like I just walked into a different planet in some cases. Where am I? What are we doing here? It was just confusing. Clarity is your friend. And wherever we can remove obstacles for people to get it, that's the win. We want people to get it, not to show them how smart we are. We want people to get it, right? Millennials aren't getting it, and they're just opting out. This one surprised me a little bit, but it didn't surprise me. Number 5, they're not finding community. If I asked, and again, I've been on the calls with many churches, it's like, well, we are welcoming. We are friendly here, right? That's the cliche answer I get over and over again, but for them to say that we can't find community in a church, oh, come on now. If anyone should be able to drive community, we should be able to do that, right? Thought?
Yes, I'm sorry. I have a question. Now, the people that they asked for this input, were they people who had left the church, people who had not been to church? What's the relationship these people have to churches?
It's the category of millennials. So it's probably a little of everything.
They just asked millennials in general about what their perceptions about the church are.
That's right. Yeah.
What's the demographic in what area of the country?
All over the country.
Could you repeat the question?
What was the demographic, or where were they coming from? But that's all over the country. Yeah. Very good. So, yeah, one last thought.
Dude, that second point, God is missing from the church. Did anybody drill down on that? Because what I'm curious about is what's missing the sort of Morgan Freeman media image of experiencing a relationship with God? I'm being serious about that, actually.
Yeah.
Because the way we encounter God is very visual in movies and television in particular. And so I'm curious, is that what's missing? Or is it that is there any more detail to that answer?
Yeah, we can certainly share the resources of where I found the information and the data. I didn't see anything specific to that question though, that they provided, but yeah. So we should be wrapping up as we're going to be transitioning, but there's a few things that I will just say that I've heard. We don't like the word evangelism as Episcopalians. So it's just something that it's kind of like, oh, do we have to even use that word? Or is that even like a word that we can say? When we come back to that question, why go to church? Here's the great hope that I have for this process that we're in over these next 12 labs. That one, you all are really smart people. We have experiences that are happening in all these different locations, and we're bringing this knowledge and experimentation coming back to this. Something has happened in your life that put you in this room. You've had an experience with God, wherever and however that was. Whatever the tradition was that it came from, or whether it was a walk out in nature, or whatever that is true for you in there, something has put you in this room. And it's been transformative, I would think. The story of Jesus and this pursuit, and you've seen and felt God show up in your life. When I simply think about evangelism and what we're going to be talking about this afternoon to start taking steps there, is that we get to bring this to our parishes, right? The same path and those experiences. That why would we want to withhold that from our neighbors and the people that are right around us? And if we need to change the term, we'll change the term. But that's the hope that I have, that the same thing that brought you in this room, that for years that you've been walking on this path, and for years you've been on this journey, that we can bring that same hope to our community and our parishes, right? Thank you. We're going to get some instructions.